The trunk came off the freight wagon wrong side up, and that was the first thing Esther Hale noticed about Silver Bend, that even her belongings arrived apologizing. She said it right herself. Nobody stepped forward to help. The street had gathered the way streets gather when something is about to happen that everyone will discuss later, and she understood, standing there with her satchel over her shoulder and old chalk dust still ground into the seam of her glove, that the something was her. Mrs. Leona Fisher stood on the schoolhouse steps with a letter in her hand. She did not read it right away. She let the children see her holding it first, let the mothers see her weigh it, and only then did she unfold the paper and speak in a voice built for being overheard. It says here that Miss Hale left her last post in Missouri without proper notice, that she was found unsuitable for a settled position. She looked up, not at Esther but at the crowd. I don't say this to shame anyone. I say it because this town needs stability. Our children have already lost half a term waiting on a teacher who might not stay. Esther kept her hands still at her sides. She had learned that much. Hands moving looked like guilt even when they were only cold. I left to nurse my father, she said. He died 3 weeks later. The board there called it unreliable because it was easier than calling it what it was. I'm sure it felt that way to you. Mrs. Fisher's voice held no cruelty in it, which was its own kind of cruelty. But a school board has to think of the children first, not the teacher's hardships. The trustees behind her did not meet Esther's eyes. One of them, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, said the position would need reconsidering, perhaps in a month, once things had settled, and Esther understood a month meant never, the way certain words in certain mouths always mean their opposite. She stood on the steps with her trunk beside her and her mother's brass handbell somewhere down in the satchel, and she did not let her chin drop. A boy's voice cut through the murmuring. Why won't anybody let her teach? She came here to be the teacher. He was perhaps 10, dark-haired, standing close to a broad man in a leather apron who had come up from the direction of the blacksmith shop with soot still on his forearms. The man put a hand on the boy's shoulder. Sam. The boy looked at the trunk, then at the shut schoolhouse door. She came all this way. Nobody answered that. The crowd began to thin the way crowds do when they've gotten what they came for and don't care to stay for what comes after. The man did not leave with the rest. He waited until it was only Esther and her trunk, still dusty from the freight wagon, and the schoolhouse door shut against her. And then he crossed the dirt with the boy trailing him and a smaller girl trailing the boy. Josiah Reed, he said, and did not offer his hand because his hands were black to the wrist and he seemed to know it. This is Sam. That's Ellie. Esther nodded to each of them in turn. The girl, perhaps 6, watched her with the particular stillness of a child cataloging a stranger. I've got a boy who's behind in his reading and a girl who hasn't started, Josiah said, and a ledger I can't keep straight to save my life. I've got a room over the shop, empty since my apprentice left. It's clean. It's got a stove. I can pay you something and board you honest until the town works out what it wants to do with itself. He did not look away when he said it. It's work, if you'll have it. Esther looked at the schoolhouse door, shut against her, and then at the man offering her a room above a forge and 2 children who needed teaching. I'll have it, she said. The forge filled the front of the building, but a narrow set of rooms ran behind it and above it, half shop and half house, as practical as Josiah Reed himself. The room upstairs smelled of coal smoke and oiled leather, and the first night she slept there, she could hear the last of the fire ticking as it cooled under the floorboards. It was not much. It was hers for as long as she kept it clean and honest, And after Missouri, that was closer to peace than she'd expected to find in a town that had just finished humiliating her on its main street. She began the children's lessons the second morning. The back room of the shop had a workbench Josiah cleared for her and 2 stools that didn't match, and the hammering from the forge came through the wall in a rhythm she learned to teach around. She rang the handbell to start each lesson. It had been her mother's, brass gone soft and dull with age, the handle worn smooth by a hand that had held it in a one-room school in Missouri 30 years before. "My mother tied a ribbon round the handle," she told Ellie one morning, turning the bell over in her palm. "Blue, so it wouldn't get lost among the primers and slates." Ellie considered the bare handle a long moment and said nothing, but she looked at it again before she went back to her letters. Sam did not want to be taught. He wanted badly not to be seen failing at it. He held the primer like it might bite him, and when he stumbled over a word he went red to the ears and looked at the door as if he might bolt through it. "You're not stupid," Esther told him the second day when he'd thrown the book down rather than sound out a word. "You're guessing instead of looking. Those aren't the same thing, and only one of them gets fixed by trying harder." He picked the book back up. He did not thank her, but he did not throw it down again. Ellie watched Esther arrange the shelf of primers, watched where she set the inkwell, with an attention that had nothing to do with reading. "Mama kept her sewing basket there," Ellie said one afternoon, nodding at the corner of the workbench where Esther had set her satchel. Esther did not move the satchel. "Then I'll find it a different corner," she said, and did, without making a ceremony of it. And Ellie watched her do that too, and something in the girl's shoulders came down half an inch. Josiah's ledger was a ruin. Esther found unpaid work going back 2 years, a widow's plow blade sharpened for nothing, a farmer's wagon wheel rebuilt and never billed. "You'll go under doing business like this," she told him one evening, the ledger open between them on the workbench. "Some of them didn't have it," Josiah said, as if that settled the matter. "Some of them could have paid something." She turned the book toward him and pointed to a line. "This entry, you charged Mrs. Pike for 2 shovels." He looked at it. "Shelves. You wrote shovels. Then she got the better bargain. She got shelves." "That too," he said, without apology, and went back to the forge. She noticed, over the following weeks, that he began leaving a cup of coffee near her lesson table before the children woke, sat down without comment. She noticed the latch on her trunk had stopped catching. She hadn't asked him to look at it. She'd mentioned once, in passing, that it stuck every morning and she had to fight it. Then one evening the latch simply worked, smooth as new, and she understood he had gone up while she was teaching, and fixed it and said nothing, because saying something would have made it a gift instead of a fact. She began keeping his supper warm on the nights he worked past dark. He began coming in quieter on those nights, careful not to wake the children, careful to lower his voice near the back room even in daytime when Ellie was bent close over her letters. None of it was declared. All of it accumulated. Mrs. Fisher came to the shop on a Tuesday about a repair on her buggy spring, and stayed after the buggy business was concluded. "You understand I only say this out of concern," she said in the doorway, gloves still on. "Children become attached to unsettled women very easily. Mr. Reed is a good man, but he is not a suitable shelter for a woman whose character has already been questioned. People are already saying you've made yourself hard to remove by getting close to his children." Esther set down her pen. "Are they saying it? Or are you saying it and calling it people?" Mrs. Fisher's mouth thinned. "I would hate for this to end badly for you, Miss Hale. Again." She left without arranging anything more. Esther sat with the ledger open in front of her and did not write another line for some time. Josiah came in from the forge an hour later, wiping his hands on a rag. He did not ask what Mrs. Fisher had said. He set a fresh cup of coffee by her elbow. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "I know." Coffee seemed safer than questions. He went back to the forge. Mr. Nathan Carter kept a clean counter and cleaner cuffs, and he looked at Esther the way a man looks at a column of figures that finally adds up right. "My sister keeps a tidy house in Glen Crossing," he said, closing his account book. "Her husband runs the dry goods there and needs a hand with the books. Steady wages, your own room, no children tugging at your skirts, no board meetings, no one in Glen Crossing who's ever heard the word Missouri." "That's kind of you to think of, Mr. Carter." "It is a sensible offer," he said. And he was right, and that was the trouble with it. It was sensible in every direction except the one that had begun to matter. She turned the offer over for 3 days. It would have solved everything cleanly. She was folding a torn cuff of Josiah's shirt one evening, mending it by the stove because she'd noticed it that morning and said nothing, when Sam came down in his nightshirt and stood in the doorway instead of going back up. "Are you leaving?" he said. Not quite a question. "I don't know yet." He was quiet a moment. "Pa doesn't ask people to stay," he said. "He just makes it so there's a reason to." Esther looked up from the mending and said nothing at all, because there was nothing to add to that. She found the handbell on the lesson table before dawn one morning, some weeks after. The handle no longer wobbled. A narrow blue ribbon had been tied around it, clean and plain, the sort she had mentioned once to Ellie and nearly forgotten she'd said aloud. Josiah said nothing about it, neither did she, but she rang it more carefully that morning, and the sound seemed to carry farther than it had any right to. Ellie found her turning it over after lessons, and touched the ribbon with one finger. Did Papa fix it? I expect he did. Ellie thought about this with the particular seriousness of a 6-year-old settling a question. Papa fixes things he wants to keep. Sam read his mother's name from the family Bible on a Thursday evening. He had refused to open the book for months. Josiah had never pushed it, had left it shut on the shelf since his wife died, unable to open it with the boy himself. Esther had worked with Sam quietly, letter by letter, until one evening he asked to try it alone. He got through the name. Only the name, Margaret Reed, in a careful, old-fashioned hand, before his voice caught and he stopped, embarrassed. "Does it still count?" he asked. "If I can only read the name." "Names count first," Esther said. Josiah stood in the doorway. He had come up to call them for supper and heard the last of it, and he said nothing at all. But he stood there a long moment with soot on his hands, and then he went back down without calling them because supper could wait. The town meeting was held in the schoolhouse, which still had 2 broken benches and a bell hanging crooked from a split bracket no one had gotten around to fixing. Mrs. Fisher stood at the front and argued that Esther had confused charity with qualification, that the children deserved a proper certified teacher. Josiah stood. He was not a man built for speeches, and did not attempt one. "My boy read his mother's name last Thursday," he said. "First time since she died. That's the only certificate I needed to see." The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when something true has been said in a place used to hearing careful things instead. He reached into his coat and set the small brass handbell on the table at the front, the blue ribbon plain against the dark wood. "If this town doesn't want her teaching under its roof," he said, My shop door stays open to any child whose people care more about learning than about gossip." The board did not collapse into apology that night. Mrs. Fisher kept her chin up, and 2 of the trustees found reasons to study the floor. But by the following week, 3 families had quietly sent their children to the back room of the blacksmith shop. 3 became 5 before Christmas, and by January the back room held more slates than horseshoes. By late winter, the board relented and offered Esther the post back properly, on the condition that she teach from the schoolhouse and keep respectable lodging. She had, for the first time since Missouri, a clean and settled way forward that owed nothing to anyone. She had Carter's offer still open behind her if she wanted it. She had every door a respectable woman could ask for. She went to the shop that evening anyway, to tell Josiah before she told the board anything at all. Word had reached him before she did, the way word reached everyone in Silver Bend. He was at the workbench, fitting a new bracket to the schoolhouse bell. "Town'll give you a room now," he said, not looking up. "Everything's settled the way it should have been from the start." "They will." He set down his tools. "I won't ask you to give that up. Won't ask you to choose this house because you've got nowhere better." He turned to face her, hat in his hands. "I've been hearing that bell every morning for months now. Started out calling the children. Somewhere along the way it started calling me, too." He turned the hat once. "I know the town can give you a room now. I'm asking if you want a home. Crooked shelf and all. Man who still puts shovels in the ledger when he means shelves." Esther reached for the small brass bell on the bench beside him. She held it a moment, thumb finding the ribbon, the worn place on the handle where her mother's hand had rested for 30 years. Then she set it down. Setting it down did not mean letting go of what it carried. It only meant she no longer had to hold the old life so tightly to keep it. She took his hand instead, black knuckles and all, and felt him go still the way a man goes still when he's asked for something and is waiting to find out if the waiting was worth it. "Yes," she said. They married that spring, once the term had properly begun. The schoolhouse bell rang true again, mended and hung back in its tower. The small brass handbell no longer belonged to only one room. Most mornings it sat on Esther's school desk. Most evenings it came home to the kitchen windowsill, where Ellie rang it when supper was ready. Sam read more easily now, and one evening at the table he read the whole of one of his mother's old letters aloud, start to finish. And nobody at that table treated it as anything but ordinary, which was exactly what made it enormous. Josiah still wrote shovels now and then where shelves belonged. Esther had stopped correcting it. She'd come to suspect he did it on purpose. On a spring morning, the schoolhouse bell rang out across Silver Bend. Sam stopped on the schoolhouse step, and Esther thought for a moment he'd forgotten his slate. Instead, he looked at the little brass bell sitting on her desk through the open door, and then across the street at his father standing by the forge. "That one still counts, too," he said. Esther looked at the bell, at the ribbon gone soft with handling. "Yes, it does." Ellie pulled him inside by the sleeve before the lesson could start without them. Josiah stood at the forge with one hand shielding his eyes, watching his children go in with the others, watching his wife raise a hand to them from the schoolhouse steps. Smoke rose from both chimneys into the same pale sky, and the street that had once gathered to watch a woman try not to break now simply went on about its morning, full of a sound that had stopped sending people away and started calling them in.